Chapter 23 of The Cruise of the Falcon by E.F. Knight. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23 Paraguay. Northerly winds detained us in Corrientes for several days, so we were enabled to see a good deal of the neighborhood. One excursion we made is worthy of mention. This was to the Colonia Resistentia, a small settlement of Italian agriculturalists in the Chaco opposite Corrientes, one of the few spots where the white man has established a footing in the Indian hunting grounds beyond the river. Don Felice, a jovial storekeeper of Corrientes who owns property in the Resistentia colony, invited us to go there with him, so one fine morning we embarked in a small lateen-sailed boat that carries passengers across the Paraná to the new settlement. We were very much overcrowded, there being 26 of us altogether. With the exception of ourselves, all were Italian colonists. There were several pretty girls among them, and 2 musicians to enliven our journey with guitar and flute. The voyage was a stormy and even a perilous one, for the north wind blew hard. In the middle of the broad river a choppy sea was running, and the waves toppled over the sides of our deep-laden vessel in a most alarming fashion. We were all soon drenched. The women shrieked and prayed, whereon Don Felice at the helm shouted to the musicians, "Toca la musica," thinking with lively strains to soothe the terrified damsels. But alas, the harpist and flutist, haggard and pale with seasickness, could not even talk, far less harmonize. Then our admiral drew forth a bottle of rum and ordered tots to be served round to all hands. This inspired the crew with greater confidence, and a pretty little Italian girl sitting next to me so far recovered as to wipe the tears from her eyes, draw forth her fan, and commence a little flirtation with the writer, which Don Felice noticing, he cried out, "Bravo!" and called public attention to the pluck of the Dona Julia, holding her forth as an example to the rest, at which she blushed and simpered, not unbecomingly, behind her fan. As a matter of fact, we were not very far from foundering on several occasions during this voyage, but bailing out all the while, we managed to reach the other side of the broad, rough Paraná, and entered the calm waters of a riacho that pierced the jungle of the Chaco. All these amiable Italians now recovered their spirits, and fanning, flirting, laughing, and music became once more the order of the day. After ascending the riacho, along whose banks basked many alligators, icares, for some miles, we came to the colony. We found quite a decent road traversing it, and seeing the tidiness, cleanliness, and signs of industry everywhere around us, we did not require to be told that this was not a native, but a foreign colony. The settlement consists of small farm allotments, whereon a hard-working, handsome, cheerful race of Piedmontese, Tyrolese, and Lombards raise from a fertile soil near every produce of the temperate and subtropical zones. Round each pretty house is a flower garden and a little plantation of potatoes, turnips, peas, a common sight at home, but a very rare and therefore pleasing one in this republic. Beyond these are the fields of maize, plantations of cotton and sugar, groves of oranges and bananas, and the cleared pastures for the cattle. None of these pleasant people are rich, but they are all in a comfortable position. They are sufficiently numerous to defy the Indians, and live contentedly and undisturbed, save for the impositions of a vile government. On sailing back to Corrientes on the 25th of July, we found that the north wind had freshened to a strong gale, so a shift to the southward within a few hours was more than probable. Norte duro, pampero seguro is the proverb of the Paraná pilots. This was one of those hot, electric days that accompany the termination of a northerly. 90 degrees in the shade, 125 degrees in the sun, a good temperature for midwinter. But this has been an exceptional season for these latitudes, un anno de norte, as Don Juan called it in disgust, and very unfavorable for the ascent of the Paraná. Un anno de crescente, too, it had proved, for the river was exceptionally high, and the larger game had retreated inland from the flooded shores of the Chaco. Hence the comparatively poor sport we had encountered. As a rule, the river banks swarm with deer, tigers, and other animals. On the morning of the 26th of July, there was a dead calm. It was terribly hot and close, a silence as of death hung over all nature, and man and beast lay listless and depressed in suspense beneath the incubus of the coming storm. Suddenly a dark mass of cloud rose rapidly from the southern horizon, and then the fierce pampero burst down on us with great fury. Its first blast was as hot as of a furnace, being the dry air of the recoiling norte. But in an incredibly short time this had passed, and instead of an atmosphere of the Sahara when the simoon blows, we had above us the cloudy, rainy sky of the autumnal equinox at home, and the cold, moist breath of the wind in our faces was exactly that of our bracing, blustering southwesters of old England. On no occasion have I experienced so very rapid a great a change in the climate as on this day. Early in the afternoon, having run at a great rate before the strong pampero, we reached the junction of the rivers Parana and Paraguay, and here, leaving the former, we proceeded to sail up the latter mighty stream, with the forests of the Republic of Paraguay on our right hand and the Indian territory of El Chaco on our left. At last, after a river voyage of 74 days, we found ourselves at the gate of that fair land of Paraguay, of which we had heard so strange things, and which we had so desired to see. The country of women, a very fairyland of romance, of which so little is known in Europe, a region the most favored by nature under the sun, a beautiful tropical garden, well watered by many lakes and rivers, and yet now the poorest and most unfortunate of the states. The history of Paraguay does not go far back, and yet it is one of the most remarkable in the world and full of instruction to communists and other theorizers on the perfect social state. Here, remote from the sea, in an earthly paradise, dwelt a mild, kindly, but brave race, that of the Guarani Indians. To them, in the commencement of the 17th century, came the Jesuit fathers, who, notwithstanding the jealousy of the Spaniards, succeeded in founding here the most important of all their missionary establishments. Paraguay became an ecclesiastical commonwealth. The fathers taught the Indians the arts of peace, and of war, too, for no little fighting had to be done at times with savage Indians and San Paulist slave hunters. The people held all their property in common, and were taught a blind obedience to their clerical rulers. They were kept in a state of perpetual pupilage, as mere children, not being allowed to acquire the art of writing or reading, and being compelled to speak the Guarani language alone. By these means, the Jesuits thought to ensure the perpetual submission of these docile savages, and to prevent the ingress of any new ideas from abroad. Such was the education and such the dependent condition of this simple people for a century and a half. Then the Jesuits were expelled from South America, and anarchy and pestilence sadly thinned the Guarani population. Next, that new spirit of revolution that had so shaken all the thrones of Europe crossed the seas, and the watchwords of political freedom were echoed from the Pampas to the Andes and even up to remote Paraguay. Not one of the Spanish-American races was in any way prepared for self-government, nor are they so to this day, but far less than all poor Indian Paraguay. But little could these docile children of the good fathers understand these new theories about liberty. What did they want with liberty? Thus, when all the states around them declared their independence from Spain, the Paraguayans did nothing, but wondered in their usual stupid way, and waited for something to turn up. Something did turn up in the shape of one Francia. Seizing the reins of government, this man constituted himself the first of the dictators or tyrants of Paraguay. His policy was similar to that of the Jesuits in many respects. Under his administration, all foreigners were excluded from the country. If any wretched stranger did venture across the frontier, he was not permitted to return, and was most probably imprisoned for life. This exclusiveness was indeed, if anything, stricter than was that of Japan until recently. To Francia succeeded Lopez I, who followed in the footsteps of his predecessor, And then came the infamous Lopez II, his son, who in his short reign succeeded in converting the once cultivated garden of Paraguay into what it now is, a jungle roamed over by tigers that have become man-eaters since their glut of human flesh in the late terrible war. A land of women and children, for nearly all the men were slain, whose population numbers but 1/6 of what it did but 20 years ago. Lopez, too, commenced by converting the so-called Republic of Paraguay into what may more appropriately be termed one huge slave estate of his own. He enforced the old laws prohibiting any native to leave the country, but encouraged foreign engineers and artificers to come to it that they might be subservient to his ambitious schemes, though towards the latter end of his administratorship he was wont to imprison and otherwise ill-treat these on the slightest pretext. The river Paraguay was closed to foreign bottoms. When an Italian schooner came up the Paraná from Buenos Aires, it was obliged to come to an anchor at the mouth of the Paraguay. The tyrant would then send an agent on board to inspect the cargo and offer a price for it. If this was accepted, the goods were stored in the government magazines and retailed to the people at high profit. If Lopez and the skipper could not come to terms, the latter had to return to Buenos Aires with his cargo, for he was not permitted to sell it to any private party. All the commerce of the country passed through the dictator's hands, who thus amassed an enormous fortune. If Lopez had contented himself with tyrannizing over the docile Guaranis, no one would have meddled with him, but in an evil hour for himself and Paraguay, he visited Europe. At Paris, he learnt all the vices of civilization and nothing more. There he took himself a mistress, an Englishwoman, another man's wife. Clever, ambitious, and unscrupulous, she flattered the vain, ignorant savage and led him to believe that he was destined to become the Napoleon of South America. He greedily drank the poison, returned to Paraguay, spent the whole revenue of the little country in preparing her for a gigantic struggle, and then set to work to conquer the southern continent. Hence that 5 years' war, which only terminated 12 years back with the death of Lopez at the hands of a Brazilian lancer, one of the most terrible wars of history between one plucky little Indian state and 3 such formidable allies as Brazil, the Argentine Republic, and Uruguay. Few know what those 5 years were, what suffering, what atrocities, what oceans of blood attended that literally war to the knife, and all to gratify the ambition of one madman, the half-breed Lopez. The Jesuit-taught, docile Guaranis followed him devotedly to the death, blindly, not loving him, and yet not fearing, but with the unreasoning, dog-like fidelity. For 5 years the unequal contest was prolonged until the Guaranis were nearly exterminated, and to this day there are 9 women to 1 man. Towards the latter years of the war, Lopez became little better than a dangerous madman, as was his prototype Nero before him. An insane suspicion of all, even his relations and dearest friends, possessed him. He was liable to sudden accessions of violent rage. He put to death all officers that were unsuccessful in battle or who were unable to carry out his impracticable orders. It is said that he had a cage of wild beasts in his palace, to whom he threw his cousins or other people that annoyed him. He ordered his own mother and sisters to be publicly whipped for expostulating with him for executing some innocent relative. He put to death his bishop brother and the noblest of the land, in his jealous hatred of any that might be considered as equal to himself. If any man was praised before him as being good or able, it was sufficient to arouse the tyrant's suspicion, and a death warrant was issued. It seems almost impossible to imagine that this reign of terror was in the 19th century, nay, but 12 short years back. After the final defeat and death of Lopez, the Allied armies occupied the country for a time, and it is but recently that the last Brazilian regiments have evacuated Concepcion and other towns. Such a tremendous war indemnity was demanded by the conquerors from the vanquished republic as will cripple her energies and render her perpetually bankrupt, for it is quite impossible that she will ever pay it, or her public loan, for the matter of that, which was fraudulently contracted for her in Europe, and of which poor Paraguay received so little. At the present day, matters are drifting along tranquilly enough in the desolate country. The form of government is as nearly as possible that of the neighboring republics, and the rivers are as open to foreign vessels as the Thames itself. Such is the history of Paraguay, the only South American republic that has no seaboard, and the only country in the world in which the conquerors have universally adopted the language of the conquered, for Guarani is still the spoken tongue, Spanish being only used by the upper classes who are not very numerous. Even the country priests can only speak the Indian dialect. But Spanish words are used for European luxuries and for numerals above 5, for which there are no equivalents in Guarani, this not being a mathematically minded race. Paraguay is indeed a beautiful and voluptuous land, a tropical forest cloven by broad, fair rivers, with gardens fair as those of the Hesperides intervening between the places of denser growth, a realm of lotus-eaters, where the worn mariner might well be tempted, like the followers of Ulysses, to wax weary of the fields of barren foam, and cry, "We will return no more, our island home is far beyond the wave, we will no longer roam." There are, indeed, certain men who have come here from Europe, and the lazy influence of the soft, beautiful climate has eaten into their souls, and they have stayed in the land of streams, unwilling to return, settling on these gentle hills that slope to the broad Paraguay, amid groves of orange trees, bananas, and papas, with white-robed, silent Indian women serving them as slaves. There is no useful product of the tropics that is not to be found in Paraguay. Sugar, coffee, yerba, cassava, tobacco, cotton, and rice all flourish on the fertile red soil. It is a land where there is an unbelievable profusion and variety of game of all sorts for the sportsman. For the explorer, too, there is on the Brazilian frontier, in latitude 24°, the half-fabulous cascade of La Guaira, where the whole volume of the Paraná falls from a great height. The old Jesuits had visited it, and described it as the most stupendous cataract in the world, even greater than Niagara. No white man has ever seen it in modern times. The Indians say that no man can dwell within 30 miles of the falls, for even at that distance the roar is so great as to produce complete deafness in time. Expeditions of whites have attempted to reach La Guaira, but all have failed, so dense is the undergrowth of the forests through which they have to cut their way, so pestilential the swamps that have to be traversed. Strange indeed are the tales that the Indians tell of some of these inner solitudes, of the gold, the jewels. One is reminded, on hearing them, of the fairy tales of the El Dorado that first urged the old Spanish adventurers to their bold explorations. The women of Paraguay, for so few are the men that of the fair sex alone it is worth while to say much, are not uncomely. They have well-molded limbs, voluptuous, lustrous eyes, and are of every color, from mahogany to the white and pink complexion of the fairest Anglo-Saxon. The dress of a Paraguayan woman consists merely of a snow-white tunic, coming down to the knees, and a white shawl, a much prettier costume than the dingy black robe of the Argentine. These women are barefooted, only the upper classes wearing boots. The shoed people is the Guarani expression for the aristocracy. This mild race lives principally on oranges, pumpkins, cassava, and other fruits and vegetables, being almost vegetarian, unlike the almost exclusively beef-eating and more ferocious Argentine of the Pampas. There can be no doubt that the Guarani is one of the highest branches of the Indian family. The Paraguayans are incontestably a handsomer race than any of the half-breeds of the neighboring republics. I have seen in this land as perfectly beautiful women as in any part of the world, but, it must be confessed, they are the exception. Many are the virtues of these poor, brave Paraguayans. They are hospitable, kindly, honest, and though marriage is looked upon as an unnecessary prelude to two young people starting housekeeping together, they are remarkably constant in their attachments. The Paraguayan girls are, like Byron's savage heroines, faithful unto death, soft as doves, but ready to give up their lives for their mates. Fiery, passionate little creatures these, and woe to him who gives one cause for jealousy, for in love and hate they have the tiger in them. The fierce Indian blood that produced a Lopez throbs in the veins of these tropical Hyades. In this land none see any shame in unlawful love. Every country priest keeps his mistress, generally more than one, and this openly, without any attempt at concealment, every parsonage containing its harem and its nursery. In a recent work on South America, the Paraguayans are reported to excuse the errors of their clergy by saying that the Pope has, in compassion for the now unpopulated condition of poor Paraguay, been pleased to grant the priests there dispensation from their vows of chastity. This excuse is a very good one, but from all accounts this people were not famed for their morality even in the days before the war. Not a few European travelers have visited Asuncion since the war, but none, I believe, have explored the interior of the country. Paraguay is indeed now for the most part an unknown country, even to its inhabitants, and yet there are few so charming regions for the traveler, be he sportsman or naturalist, or merely an admirer of what is grand and beautiful in nature. What more delightful than an expedition of a few friends in a properly furnished and light canoe upon these glorious rivers and lakes, many of which have been hitherto undisturbed by the frailest bark boat of the Indians? At times the explorer will, to his amazement, suddenly come upon a stately stone ruin in a dense forest, overgrown and half hidden with the rank creepers. It is the remains of a Christian church, marking the site of some old Jesuit mission, long since deserted to the tigers, all signs of the ancient clearings and mate plantations wiped away, for the rapid growth of tropical vegetation soon fills up the scars of man's handiwork. End of chapter 23.